My name is Daniel Whitaker. I am 34 years old, married for 7 years, and I live with my wife, Eleanor, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I work as a surveyor, spending much of my time outdoors, while Eleanor teaches at a local elementary school. We have always shared an appreciation for nature. The woods, the ridges, the deep rivers, all of it felt like a quiet inheritance from the state we both called home. Neither of us had ever been the type to crave nightlife or big cities. We saved for vacations that led us deeper into forests, not out of them. So when we decided to spend a week camping in a remote section of northern Pennsylvania, it was not out of character. What happened there, however, was nothing we could have anticipated, and I find myself compelled to put it into words, even though every sentence feels like reopening something that has not truly closed. Our plan was simple. Eleanor had the last week of summer break free, and I had arranged time off work. We packed the essentials: tent, sleeping bags, food supplies, my old Coleman stove, and a few comforts Eleanor insisted on, like her paperback novels and a soft blanket she refused to leave at home. We decided against staying in a designated campground. I had scouted a less traveled area months earlier while working deep in Susquehannock State Forest. It was far from the maintained trails, a place where the trees seemed to close in tighter, and you could walk half a day without crossing another person. I had marked a clearing on my survey map, close to a creek, that seemed ideal for camping. Eleanor agreed. The idea of isolation, of being removed from people and noise, sounded like the reset we both needed. The drive took nearly 4 hours. By the time we left paved roads and turned onto gravel, civilization was already behind us. The GPS signal blinked out. Our phones lost reception, reduced to useless rectangles. Eleanor laughed when she noticed and said, "Guess we're really alone now." I smiled, but inside I felt a small ripple of unease. I was used to this kind of silence, but there was a difference between being alone for work in daylight and choosing to sleep far from anyone for nights on end. Still, I kept that thought to myself. I didn't want to dampen Eleanor's excitement. When we finally parked the truck on a service road, the forest greeted us with a density that felt alive. We carried our gear down a narrow game trail until the trees opened into the clearing I remembered. It was just as I had pictured: flat ground for our tent, a canopy that allowed patches of sunlight, and the creek nearby providing water and the steady sound of flow. Eleanor clapped her hands together, delighted. "Perfect," she said, and it did feel perfect, at least at first. We set up camp efficiently. Years of smaller trips had given us a rhythm. I unfolded the tent poles while Eleanor organized the sleeping bags and gear. By late afternoon, everything was in place. We boiled water for tea, sat on a log, and listened to the woods. Birds called in the distance, cicadas droned, and the creek carried on. There was no wind, no sound of cars, no distant hum of towns. Just the layered noises of a living forest. Eleanor leaned against me and whispered, "This is what I needed." I believed her. I wanted to believe it for myself too. As evening fell, we lit a small fire. The flames cracked in the growing dark. We cooked a simple dinner and ate with the satisfaction of people who had nothing to rush toward. Afterward, Eleanor read by flashlight, while I leaned back against my pack, tracing the outline of stars through the breaks in the canopy. I do not know the precise moment when the feeling shifted, only that it did. One moment the night was ordinary, the next it pressed in heavier, as though the silence itself was waiting. The cicadas stopped. The creek seemed louder because everything else had gone still. Eleanor noticed too. She lowered her book and frowned. "Where did they all go?" she asked. I had no answer. I told myself it was natural. Sometimes the woods fall quiet without reason. Predators moving through or shifts in temperature. But the quiet lingered. We both strained to hear something, anything. A branch cracked deeper in the trees, deliberate and slow. Eleanor's hand found mine. "Dear," I whispered, though I did not believe it. The sound came again, closer, another branch breaking under weight. Whatever moved out there was heavy. The fire popped, startling us both. Eleanor exhaled nervously and forced a laugh. "You're right. Probably just a deer." She tried to return to her book, but I could see her eyes flickering to the dark. Eventually the cicadas returned, tentatively at first and then in full chorus. The normal rhythm of the forest resumed as if nothing had interrupted it. I told myself to relax, but the tension had lodged itself inside me. Later, when we climbed into the tent, I lay awake listening. Eleanor fell asleep quickly, her breathing even and soft. For me, sleep came in fragments, broken by small sounds outside. I could not shake the sense that something had watched us earlier. I convinced myself it was imagination, born from too much quiet. I must have dozed because when I next opened my eyes, it was deep night. The tent glowed faintly from the embers outside. That was when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps circling. Not the scatter of small animals, not the cautious tread of a deer. These were measured steps, slow, pacing around us. I froze listening. The hair on my arms lifted. The steps paused, then resumed, moving from one side of the tent to the other. I reached for the pocket knife I kept by my sleeping bag. Eleanor stirred slightly but did not wake. I debated whether to shake her, but fear of panicking her kept me still. The footsteps stopped near the back of the tent. Silence stretched. My heart hammered. After a minute that felt endless, the steps retreated, fading into the woods until there was only the creek again. I did not sleep after that. I waited, every muscle tense, until the first light of dawn filtered through the nylon walls. Eleanor woke cheerful, unaware of what I had heard. I almost convinced myself not to tell her, but the weight of it pressed until I did. She frowned, skeptical but not dismissive. "Maybe it was an animal," she suggested. "Maybe," I replied, but we both knew animals do not walk in circles with such deliberate rhythm. We spent the morning hiking along the creek. Sunlight filtered through leaves, and the forest seemed harmless again. Eleanor tried to keep the mood light, pointing out wildflowers and teasing me for my serious face. I wanted to let her pull me back into ease, but every broken branch made me glance twice. Every shadow seemed heavier. At one point we came across old boot prints in the mud near the creek. They were deep, larger than my own, and heading toward our camp. Eleanor crouched to study them. "Hunters," she guessed. I nodded, though I had never known hunters to wander this far-off trail without packs or gear. The prints stopped at the clearing's edge, as though whoever left them had walked straight into the place we slept. That night, unease returned sharper. We ate quietly, listening for sounds beyond the fire. The woods obliged us with occasional rustles, but nothing like the footsteps. Eleanor tried to reassure me. "If someone's out there, they probably just passed through. No reason to linger." I nodded, but doubt filled me. The boot prints had not continued past our clearing. Whoever it was had stopped here. And as I crawled into the tent again, knife within reach, I could not shake the thought that something had chosen to stop exactly where we were, and that perhaps it had not left at all. That second night in the woods carved itself into my memory more sharply than any other. We had banked the fire lower, the orange light barely enough to push back the dark. Eleanor nestled into her sleeping bag and drifted off quickly, but my body refused rest. Every shift of the wind felt like a presence. The canvas of the tent whispered against itself, and the creek outside seemed louder than before, like it was rushing to cover other noises. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again, the footsteps. They came faintly at first, as though circling from a distance. The pattern was unmistakable, steady and deliberate. My pulse quickened. I gripped the knife in my hand and held my breath, hoping Eleanor would stay asleep. The steps crept closer, crunching on leaves, pausing, then moving again. What made it worse was the sense of mimicry. Each time I shifted slightly on my mat, the sound outside followed with a half-second delay, as though whoever was out there wanted me to know they were copying me. When I drew a slow breath, I swore I could hear a faint echo of it outside, raspy and too precise to be an accident. I sat up, heart pounding, and whispered, "Hello." The word came out dry, catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped immediately. The silence afterward was unbearable, stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. Then, from just beyond the tent wall, I heard a sound that should not have been possible. My own voice answering back. "Hello," it repeated, the tone wrong, strained, as though my throat had been dragged across gravel. I froze, every muscle clamped in terror. Eleanor stirred beside me, mumbling something in her sleep, and the thing outside shifted again, almost curiously, as if reacting to her. I snapped out of paralysis and shook her gently. "Elle, wake up." She blinked, disoriented, then sat up when she saw my expression. "What is it?" she whispered. Before I could answer, the voice came again, this time closer, right at the thin wall of nylon. "Hello." Eleanor's face drained of color. She clutched my arm and whispered, "That's you." "No," I said. "It isn't." We sat there silent, listening. Whatever it was had grown still too, waiting. After long minutes, the sound of slow retreating steps began, measured and unhurried, until they melted into the forest. Eleanor gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. "Daniel, we have to leave in the morning," she said, her voice shaking. I wanted to agree immediately, but pride and fear tangled in me. Leaving meant hiking back in the dark with no clear trail, risking getting lost. Part of me still wanted to explain it away, to believe it was someone playing a cruel trick, but there were no other campers for miles. I had chosen this place for its isolation. Who would come this far just to torment us? We didn't sleep again that night. Eleanor insisted we pack. The air was cold, our movements sluggish from exhaustion. I tried to keep calm for her sake, but every snapped twig made me flinch. We folded the tent quickly, doused the fire, and strapped everything into our packs. Just as we were about to leave, I noticed something in the dirt by where the fire had been. Prints. Not just the boot prints from before, newer ones, deeper, circling our camp in a wide ring. But there was something wrong with them. The tread pattern was identical to mine. Every detail, down to the worn edge of my heel, but they were larger, stretched as if someone had taken my footprint and pulled it into a distorted version. Eleanor saw them too. She stared for a long time, then whispered, "It's copying you." I couldn't answer. My stomach twisted. I wanted to deny it, but the evidence was right there in the soil. We left quickly, following the faint game trail back toward the service road. The forest felt hostile now. The trees seemed taller, pressing together. The light dimmer than it should have been for mid-morning. Eleanor kept glancing behind us, her face pale, her lips tight. After about an hour, the trail disappeared. I stopped, scanning for landmarks. I was certain we had been heading the right direction, but the creek we should have paralleled was nowhere to be heard. The undergrowth thickened, and the path seemed to curve back on itself. Eleanor noticed too. "Daniel, we've been here already." She pointed to a fallen birch with its bark peeling in strips. I recognized it. We had passed it less than half an hour earlier. Somehow we had looped back. My throat went dry. I pulled out the compass I always carried. The needle spun uselessly, twitching back and forth as though caught in a magnet. Eleanor whispered, "We can't be stuck here." I tried to steady my voice. "We'll keep moving." Just one direction until we hit the road. It has to be out there. So we walked. I chose a bearing and forced us to stick to it. The forest grew quieter as the hours passed, the usual sounds thinning until only our breathing and the crunch of our boots remained. And then even that didn't feel like ours anymore. Somewhere behind us, footsteps fell in sync with our own. At first I thought it was an echo, but the rhythm was wrong. When I quickened my pace, the sound lagged, then caught up. When I slowed, it overshot me, then corrected. Eleanor noticed too. She turned sharply, eyes wide. "There's nothing there," she said, though her voice trembled. But the sound persisted, dogging us, always just out of sight. By late afternoon, our nerves were frayed out. We hadn't found the road, and the forest felt endless. We stopped to drink water, trying to rest. That was when Eleanor gasped and pointed at the trees. Carved into the bark of an oak were letters. My name, Daniel. The letters were deep, fresh, as though gouged only moments earlier. My skin prickled. Eleanor grabbed my sleeve. We ran, abandoning the idea of direction, just pushing forward, desperate to put distance between ourselves and that tree. Branches tore at our clothes. Thorns scratched our arms. The sound of footsteps followed, keeping pace effortlessly no matter how fast we moved. Finally, we stumbled into another clearing. My legs ached, lungs burning. Eleanor collapsed onto a fallen log, crying quietly. I scanned the area, desperate for any sign of the road. Instead, I found something worse. In the dirt at the edge of the clearing stood a rough circle of stones. Not random, but arranged deliberately, stacked in pairs. At the center lay an object that made my stomach clench. Our blanket, the one Eleanor had insisted we bring, folded neatly as if placed there on display. Eleanor covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. How did it get that?" I had no answer. The blanket had been packed deep in her bag, zipped and clipped shut. Yet here it was, cleaned it. Impossible. We didn't move for a long moment. The woods around us seemed to lean closer, watching. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "It doesn't want us here. It's showing us." I wanted to argue, to deny, but I couldn't. Every sign pointed to something deliberate, intelligent, and malicious. We were not lost by accident. We were being kept. Night fell faster than it should have. The shadows swallowed the clearing before we could decide what to do. We were too exhausted to keep running, but too terrified to stay where we were. In the end, fear of stumbling blindly through the woods in the dark forced us to set the tent again, hearts racing with every snap of a twig. Inside, Eleanor clung to me, trembling. "If we make it out," she whispered, "we can never tell anyone. They wouldn't believe us." I stroked her hair, though my hands shook. "We'll make it out," I said, though the words felt hollow. Outside, the woods grew silent again. And then, just as sleep threatened to overtake us, the mimicry returned. This time, it was Eleanor's voice. From just beyond the tent wall, in a strained, broken echo, came the words, "We'll make it out." The sound of Eleanor's own voice, warped and leaking through the thin fabric of the tent, froze her in place. I felt her body stiffen against mine, her nails digging into my arm as if to anchor herself to something real. Neither of us spoke, terrified that any sound would invite another reply. The silence stretched so long I wondered if I had imagined it. But then it came again, slower this time, breaking across syllables like someone learning how to speak. "We'll make it out." Eleanor whimpered softly, muffled against my chest. My pulse thundered in my ears. I wanted to tell her it wasn't real, that maybe the forest was playing tricks, but the words died before they formed. I knew what I'd heard. The mimic circled us through the night. Sometimes it used my voice, sometimes hers, sometimes both in quick succession, weaving fragments of phrases we had said that day. The cadence was always slightly off, like a bad recording with the tape stretched. At one point, it repeated Eleanor's laugh from earlier, when she had joked about the GPS dying. Except it was lower, hollow, and without warmth. We did not sleep. We clutched each other until dawn finally bled gray through the fabric of the tent. When we unzipped it, there were no prints in the soil. No sign of anything at all. Only the stillness of the clearing and the eerie neatness of our belongings. The blanket remained folded in the circle of stones, untouched. Eleanor refused to step near it. "It's bait," she whispered. I agreed. I didn't want to touch it either. We left it there, abandoning one of the few comforts we'd brought. Packs on our shoulders, we pushed out of the clearing, desperate for movement, for progress of any kind. The forest gave us nothing but repetition. Every direction led us back to the same landmarks, the fallen birch with its peeling bark, the carved oak with my name, now joined by another gouged word. Eleanor, etched crudely beneath mine. She stared at it with wide eyes, then turned to me. "Daniel, we're not lost. It's moving around us." Her words rang true. I couldn't admit it aloud, but deep inside I knew she was right. The forest wasn't simply confusing us, something was arranging it. By midday, hunger gnawed at us. We stopped to eat granola bars, though neither of us could stomach much. I kept scanning the trees, certain I'd catch sight of a figure, but the woods offered only absence. Still, the sense of being watched grew heavier. At one point, Eleanor gasped and pointed. She thought she saw someone behind a tree. When I ran toward it, the space was empty, only bark and moss untouched. We argued about what to do. Eleanor wanted to leave the packs behind and run until our legs gave out. I insisted we keep them, food, water. Even a tent could mean survival. If we panic, we'll die faster, I told her. The words sounded cold even to me, but I couldn't let fear strip us of what little preparation we had. That night we built no fire. We didn't dare draw attention. We huddled in the tent, whispering in short bursts, trying to convince ourselves that morning would bring escape. But the mimic found us again. It began softly, my voice, calling Eleanor's name from somewhere deep in the woods. At first she thought it was me and answered weakly. When my actual voice contradicted hers, she realized the mistake, her face twisted in dread. The mimic called again, closer. "Eleanor." It croaked, my own tone bent in half. She covered her ears. I held her tighter, wishing I could block out the sound myself. Then came her own voice from the other side of the tent, calm and measured. "Daniel, it's over here." I shook my head violently. "Don't listen." The mimic circled, weaving our voices together, sometimes speaking over itself, sometimes blending them into something guttural. The tent quivered as though something brushed against it. I drew the knife again, holding it in front of me like it could ward off whatever was out there. Then the zipper shifted. I saw it move, the small metal teeth pulling apart without a hand to guide them. Eleanor screamed and clutched me. I lunged forward, yanking the zipper back up and snapping the clasp into place. My hands shook violently. The mimic fell silent after that, as though disappointed. We didn't hear it again until dawn. When we finally emerged from the tent, something new waited for us. On the ground before the entrance lay a pair of boots. My boots. Except they weren't. The leather was stretched wrong, the soles warped, the laces frayed but tied into neat bows. They were larger, like the distorted footprints we had seen before, as though something had tried to replicate my belongings, but hadn't understood the shape. Eleanor backed away, her voice trembling. "It wants to be you." I couldn't look at them for long. We left the clearing again, walking until our legs ached. This time, the forest didn't bother hiding its tricks. We came across another clearing by late afternoon, and at first it felt new, until we noticed the circle of stones again. At the center lay not the blanket this time, but Eleanor's book, propped open to the page she'd been reading our first night. She broke then. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she whispered, "It's inside our things. It knows what we touch, what we keep close." I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't comfort myself. Every sign pointed to one truth: we were not meant to leave. We forced ourselves onward, dragging through undergrowth until the sky dimmed again. That night, we didn't pitch the tent. We crouched beneath a fallen tree, praying that the mimic wouldn't find us. But of course it did. The footsteps began around midnight, circling our hiding place in a slow radius. Then came the voices, not just ours this time, but others, layers of speech we didn't recognize, rasping fragments in tones that didn't belong to human throats. They overlapped, whispered, laughed, cried. At one point, a child's voice sang a broken tune before cutting off into silence. Eleanor pressed her hands over her ears and sobbed. I held her and whispered, "It can't touch us, it's just noise." But even as I said it, I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a tall shadow gliding between trees, too thin, too long-limbed, slipping away before I could track it. The mimic was no longer content with sound. It wanted to be seen. By dawn, our bodies were wrecked. We stumbled on autopilot, driven only by fear and desperation. When the trees finally thinned and sunlight broke open into another clearing, I almost wept with relief until I realized what stood in the middle. Our tent, set up perfectly. Sleeping bags inside, the stove beside it. The blanket draped neatly across the entrance. Everything arranged as though we had never left. Eleanor stopped dead. "No," she whispered. "No, we tore it down. We left it." But there it was, waiting. We stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, staring at the tent as though it had grown out of the ground overnight. The fabric rippled slightly in the morning breeze, harmless in appearance, ordinary even. But we knew better. Eleanor shook her head violently, whispering, "Don't go near it. Daniel, don't." Her fear was contagious. I didn't want to step closer either. The sight of our belongings, set up so neatly after we had carried them miles away, made my skin crawl. It wasn't just mimicry now. It was possession. Whatever we had stumbled into was rearranging the world around us, laying out familiar things like bait, like traps. Maybe, I started, then stopped. I couldn't even form an excuse. There was no maybe. We hadn't done this. Eleanor tugged my arm. We'll keep moving. Pretend it isn't there. So we did. We turned our backs on the tent and walked deeper into the trees, though every step felt like walking away from ourselves. My pack seemed heavier than before. Eleanor trailed behind, her breath shallow, eyes darting toward every shadow. We didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say that didn't sound like panic. By midday, we were utterly lost. The landmarks had twisted again. The carved oak was back, our names gouged deeper. The edges darkened as though they had been burned. Underneath, a new word waited, sta. Eleanor broke down when she saw it. "It's telling us we can't leave," she said, sinking to her knees. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. "Daniel, what if this forest doesn't end? What if it's just circles forever?" I knelt beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. "It ends. It has to. We'll find the road. We just have to keep walking." But even as I said it, I felt the hollowness in my chest. We kept moving, driven by stubbornness more than hope. Hours later, we stumbled into another clearing. My heart sank before I even registered what I was looking at. The tent again. This time, it wasn't empty. Shapes moved inside. At first, I thought it was the wind tugging at fabric, but then a silhouette leaned against the wall from within. Tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, head cocked at an angle that defied human posture. Eleanor gasped and stumbled backward. The shape pressed closer, dragging fingers down the nylon. The sound was like claws scratching glass. Then it spoke, the voice muffled by fabric but unmistakable. "Come in." The words were in my tone, low and deliberate. Eleanor clutched my arm so tightly it hurt. "We're leaving. Right now." We ran. Branches whipped at our faces, roots tried to snare our boots. But adrenaline pushed us forward. Behind us, I swore I could hear the tent zipper tearing open, though I didn't dare look back. We ran until the forest blurred, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. Finally, we collapsed near a cluster of boulders, panting, trembling. Eleanor clung to me, her face wet with tears. "We're never getting out," she whispered. I wanted to argue, but I was too tired, too scared. That night, we didn't even try to rest. We huddled against the rocks, listening. The forest had gone quiet again, suffocating in its stillness. Then the mimic returned, but this time it didn't circle us. It came in close. First, Eleanor's voice, whispering my name from behind the rocks. Then mine, calling hers from the opposite direction. The voices grew louder, overlapping, urgent. "Daniel, Eleanor," over and over from every side, closing in. I covered my ears, but the sound vibrated inside my skull. Eleanor sobbed openly, begging it to stop. Then the voices shifted. They began speaking in unison, repeating a single phrase in our tones, distorted and cracked. "You belong here." I couldn't take it. I stood, knife in hand, and shouted into the darkness, "Leave us alone." For a moment, silence. Then the forest erupted in laughter, our laughter, twisted and hollow, echoing from every tree. Eleanor collapsed, curling into herself, muttering, "Make it stop, make it stop." I pulled her close, shielding her as best I could, though I knew it was useless. The mimic had us caged, and the forest was its walls. By dawn, the laughter faded. We were left hollow, drained, too weak to keep moving. But hunger forced us onward. We ate the last of our food and drank from the creek we stumbled across, though the water tasted metallic, wrong. Eleanor gagged after swallowing, insisting it felt thick, but we had no choice. Later that day, the forest offered us something new, a path. A narrow trail wound through the undergrowth, faint but visible. It looked human-made. Eleanor's eyes lit with a flicker of hope. "Daniel, it could lead out." I hesitated. Every instinct told me it was another trick, but we had no strength left for endless wandering, so we followed it. The path twisted between trees, narrowing until we had to walk single file. The air grew colder, the canopy darker. After what felt like an hour, the trail widened into another clearing. I stopped dead. In the center stood two figures. At first glance, they looked like us, me and Eleanor, standing side by side. But their proportions were wrong. Their limbs stretched too long, their faces blurred as though half, formed from shadow and clay. They wore our clothes, or something close to them, fabric stretched and sagging, colors slightly off. The mimicry had taken shape. Eleanor screamed, stumbling backward. The figures tilted their heads in unison, jerky and unnatural, before taking a step toward us. Their movements were delayed, like watching a reflection in warped glass. When they opened their mouths, our voices spilled out in broken chorus. "Don't leave." We ran again, blind with terror, crashing through undergrowth until our bodies ached. Behind us, I heard the sound of pursuit. Steps too long, too heavy, crashing against the earth. But when we finally stopped to breathe, nothing followed. The forest was empty once more. We collapsed in exhaustion, shaking, whispering prayers we hadn't spoken in years. Eleanor's face was pale, her lips cracked. "Daniel," she whispered, "if we don't make it out, promise you'll remember me." I kissed her forehead, choking back tears. We're getting out. Both of us. But the promise felt fragile, like the forest could snap it apart at any moment. That night, we didn't even attempt shelter. We lay against each other beneath the open sky, praying that dawn might bring salvation. Instead, the forest brought something else. When the voices returned, they weren't outside. They were inside our heads. Eleanor gasped, clutching her temples, crying out as if her skull was splitting. I felt it too, a vibration, a pressure, a voice that wasn't sound but thought. It repeated the same phrase again and again, in both of our voices. You belong here. The intrusion into our minds was worse than any sound outside the tent. At least when it circled us in the dark, we could pretend barriers existed, that fabric and firelight meant something. But this voice bypassed all defenses. It bloomed inside my skull, crowding out my own thoughts until it was hard to tell which ones belonged to me. You belong here. The phrase repeated endlessly, sometimes in my voice, sometimes in Eleanor's, sometimes in a broken union of both. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It pulsed through my head like static, like someone tapping directly against my brain. Eleanor writhed beside me, pressing her hands to her temples, whispering, "Stop, stop, stop," as though words could banish it. I wanted to comfort her, but the pressure was overwhelming. My vision blurred, trees swaying and bending, as though the forest itself moved in rhythm with the words. I thought of the carved oak, of the boots that weren't mine, of the tent reappearing again and again. All of it had been leading here, to this violation of the last thing we thought untouchable. At some point, the repetition fractured. The phrase broke into new words, tangled, clumsy but carrying intent. Stay, stay. Not yours, ours now. The pressure eased only when Eleanor screamed. The forest seemed to pause, listening, savoring her terror. Then the silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor collapsed into my arms, shaking violently, her eyes wide and unfocused. We stayed like that until dawn, neither of us sleeping. By morning, Eleanor's voice was hoarse, her body limp with exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. I brushed hair from her face, though my own hands trembled. "We'll find the road. Today, no matter what." But the forest wasn't done with us. We set off, dragging ourselves through undergrowth, determined to keep moving in one direction. Hours passed, the sun shifting overhead, but no road appeared. Only more trees, more silence. Hunger gnawed at us. Thirst burned our throats. The water from the creek had made Eleanor ill, her stomach twisting painfully. She doubled over at one point, dry, hiving into the leaves. While she crouched there, I looked around desperately for landmarks. That was when I saw it again. The tent. This time it wasn't in a clearing. It stood crooked between trees, jammed against a slope, as if it had forced itself into a place it didn't belong. The fabric sagged, seams stretched unnaturally. The sight of it made bile rise in my throat. Eleanor followed my gaze, then shook her head violently. "No, I won't look at it again." We turned away, forcing ourselves to walk in the opposite direction. But 20 minutes later it was there again, set neatly this time as though mocking us. Inside, shadows shifted. Eleanor's strength broke. She sank to the ground, sobbing openly. "It won't let us leave," she whispered. "Daniel, it's already decided." I knelt, gripping her shoulders. "Don't say that. If it wanted us dead, it could have killed us already. It wants something else." "But what?" The question gnawed at me. Did it want us to surrender, to stay willingly, or was it playing with us, stretching our terror like a child stretching a bug's wings before the kill? That night, we tried to keep walking, refusing to stop. But exhaustion claimed us. Around midnight, Eleanor stumbled and fell, too weak to rise. I lowered her to the ground, pulling her close, whispering promises I couldn't believe. The forest around us was alive with sound again. Not cicadas, not owls, but whispers. Countless voices layered over one another, speaking fragments of language, some ours, some alien. When the mimic returned, it didn't bother with distance. A figure stepped into view. At first, I thought it was me again, the same warped reflection we had seen before. But as it drew closer, I saw it was Eleanor. Or rather, a version of her. Taller, stretched, face blurred at the edges, but undeniably her. Her hair, her stance, her clothes reproduced in uncanny imitation. The sight shattered Eleanor. She screamed, covering her face, begging it not to come closer. The mimic tilted its head, jerky and wrong, then echoed her scream in perfect pitch, dragging it out until the trees themselves seemed to vibrate with the sound. I staggered to my feet, knife raised, though I knew it was useless. Get away from her. I shot it. The mimic stilled. Then, in my voice, it said, "Get away from her." Eleanor sobbed harder, curling into herself. I stepped between them, trembling. The mimic didn't move forward, but it didn't retreat either. It simply stood there, head cocked, watching. Then, slowly, it raised one arm and pointed deeper into the forest. "Come," it rasped, both in my tone and Eleanor's. I shook my head, my throat dry. "We're not going anywhere with you." The mimic lowered its arm. Then it smiled, or at least stretched its face into something that suggested a smile, though no human expression had ever looked like that. Without another sound, it melted back into the trees. We didn't follow. We couldn't. We clung to each other through the night, praying it wouldn't return. But the forest remained restless, alive with whispers and shifting shadows. By dawn, Eleanor was feverish. Her skin burned hot, her eyes glazed. She muttered incoherent words, fragments of the mimic's phrases. "Stay belong ours." I tried to soothe her, but fear coiled in my gut. It wasn't just copying us anymore, it was infecting us. I carried her as best I could, stumbling through the forest with her weight on my back. My body screamed with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. I told myself that if I just kept moving, I would find the road, or another person, or any sign of escape. But the forest gave me nothing, only trees, endless and identical. By midday, I collapsed beneath her weight. We lay together on the forest floor, Eleanor's breath shallow, her skin clammy now instead of hot. She gripped my hand weakly and whispered, "Daniel, I think it already has me." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "No, don't say that. You're stronger than this." But even as I said it, I heard movement behind us. When I turned, my blood turned to ice. Another Eleanor stood there. Not blurred this time, not stretched. Perfect, every detail correct, her face, her hair, her trembling hands. She looked down at us with a calm expression, then spoke in Eleanor's voice. "Daniel, come with me. She can't go any farther." I looked from the mimic to the real Eleanor, weak and pale in my arms. My chest ached, my mind splitting. The mimic's tone was perfect, flawless. For a moment, I couldn't tell which voice was hers and which was not. Eleanor squeezed my hand faintly, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Don't believe it." The mimic smiled softly, tilting its head just like Eleanor always did when she teased me. "You'll die out here," it said. "With me. You'll live. Belong." I tightened my grip on the knife, though it felt pathetic in my hand. The forest went utterly still, waiting for my choice. The clearing was a stage, and I was caught between two versions of the woman I loved. Eleanor lay limp in my arms, feverish and fading, while the other stood upright and unbroken, eyes clear, body steady. The mimic smiled gently, reassuringly, as though it had studied every nuance of her kindness. "Daniel," it said in her voice, "you don't have to suffer anymore." The real Eleanor tried to lift her head, her lips barely moving. "Don't believe?" Her voice was weak, rasping, the words almost swallowed by the forest. I looked back at the mimic. It tilted its head, copying the real Eleanor's mannerisms perfectly, almost mockingly. "She wants you to die out here," it said. "I want you to live. With me. You belong here." The words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. Belong? My mind was rag. my body failing, and part of me wanted to collapse into the offer to surrender, to let someone else decide for me. But then Eleanor coughed weakly, her grip tightening on my hand with what little strength she had left. The faint squeeze was enough. It was imperfect, fragile, and human. The mimic's perfection suddenly felt like a mask stretched too tight. "No," I whispered. "You're not her." The mimic's smile wavered, then widened grotesquely. Its skin rippled, face blurring for a moment before reforming. The forest seemed to sigh around us, the trees creaking as though disappointed. "You will stay," it said, voice shifting from Eleanor's to mine, to something deeper layered. One way or another. It stepped closer. I raised the knife, trembling but determined. "Stay back." The mimic paused, tilting its head again. Then, with startling speed, it turned and melted into the trees, gone in seconds as though it had never been there. The silence it left behind was worse than its presence. Eleanor moaned softly. I held her tighter, whispering promises I didn't believe. "We'll get out. I swear it." But the forest didn't let us rest. That night, we didn't dare close our eyes. Whispers crawled through the trees, words stitched together from our voices, repeating endlessly. Sometimes they begged, sometimes they commanded, sometimes they just laughed. My knife felt useless in my hand. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering fragments of the same words the mimic had forced into our heads. By dawn, I knew we couldn't go on like this. If we stayed, we'd waste away, and the forest would have us entirely. I had one choice left: fire. I gathered fallen branches, stacking them high. Eleanor lay nearby, too weak to help, her eyes glassy. I sparked the flame with shaking hands, feeding it until it roared higher than any campfire we'd built before. Smoke rose into the canopy, curling upward, a signal or a challenge. The forest didn't like it. The whispers grew louder, angrier. The ground trembled faintly beneath us. Shadows flickered in the smoke, tall figures stretching and twisting, circling just beyond the light. Eleanor whimpered, clutching my sleeve, but I kept feeding the fire, daring the mimic to show itself. And it did. Shapes emerged from the tree line. Not one but many. Dozens of figures, all imperfect reflections of us, faces blurred, limbs too long, clothes hanging wrong. They surrounded the clearing, watching with empty patience. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to stand tall, knife in one hand, fire at my back. "You can't have us," I shouted, my voice cracking. "We don't belong to you." The figures swayed in unison, their heads tilting. Then, as one, they spoke in a chorus of our voices. "You already do." The sound rattled through me, but I clung to the fire. It was the only thing that felt real. I kicked burning branches outward, scattering sparks toward them. The figures recoiled slightly, their forms flickering like smoke. The fire hurt them, or at least unsettled them. That was enough. I hoisted Eleanor onto my back again, ignoring the scream of my muscles, and stepped through the smoke. The figures parted reluctantly, hissing in voices not quite human. Some reached toward us, but shrank back from the flames. Step by step, we forced our way through. The forest twisted around us, trees rearranging, paths looping. But I didn't let us stop. I carried Eleanor until my body threatened to collapse. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, the ground changed. Gravel. I blinked in disbelief. A road. Cracked, but real. I stumbled onto it, nearly dropping Eleanor in my shock. Sunlight broke through the canopy, warmer than it had felt in days. For the first time, I heard something beyond the forest, the faint hum of an engine, distant but approaching. Eleanor stirred weakly. "Daniel, we made it," I whispered, tears spilling down my face. "We're out." Minutes later, a pickup truck rounded the bend, a hunter at the wheel. He slammed the brakes when he saw us, leaping out with wide eyes. "Jesus Christ, you folks all right?" I collapsed to my knees, still clutching Eleanor. "Help her," I begged. "Please." He rushed to us, helping lift her into the truck. As we drove away, I looked back once, just once. The forest loomed behind us, still and silent. But along the edge of the trees, a dozen blurred figures stood watching, their heads tilted in unison. One of them lifted a hand and waved. Eleanor survived, though the fever lingered for weeks. Doctors said it was likely infection from bad water. They didn't believe me when I told them what we'd seen. I stopped trying to explain. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the faint echo of my own voice whispering from the corners of the dark. "You belong here." I hold Eleanor close when it comes, praying that the forest is far behind us. But deep down I know the truth. We never really left.